And so part of what we're doing is repairing the breach in the system. One, we first work on the adult practitioner, and we talk more around cultural responsiveness and cultural competency. And we do that by self-assessments. We never know what their own assessment is, but we aggregate that in the system. So we see broadly, when we have 300-400 leaders that we're working with, we can see where are they along a continuum from denial to adaptability. And we index on training to get the leader to see the system. Because if boys, and I would really say any youth in particular, when they see an environment of belonging and they feel an environment of belonging, then they not only participate, but they engage, right? And it's active engagement that we want.
Welcome to Empowering Leadership, a podcast from Dorrier Underwood. Join us as we explore new perspectives on leadership and discover what it takes to be effective as a leader. Here's your host, Doug McVadon.
My guest today on the Empowering Leadership podcast is Michael DeVaul, and Michael's with the YMCA in a role you probably have never heard of. He's the National Director for the YMCA strategy for boys and young men of color. And we're going to unpack that and find out, what you're up to and why you're up to it. But first of all, I just want to thank you for taking the time out to be on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. It is what a pleasure. And I know of your organization, longstanding in Charlotte, so we appreciate all that you do.
Well, thank you. And you're talking about Dorrier Underwood, and we do a lot of work with organizational transformation and leadership coaching, and that's certainly the field that you're in. That is transforming the context that people have to operate in. So why don't you just give us the background rather than take my version?
Yeah. Well, let me first thank you again. I am in a national job, but I should start maybe with my own story. I have worked for the Y for 42 years professionally. So
wow.
I am 62 and started my work out in Evanston, Illinois, which is where I'm from, as a youth director. But I was also a person who has been involved in the Y literally since I was 7. So I was a member of the Y early on, and I was actually a member of the Y when there were Black Ys and white Ys, which some people have forgot that occurred, right? The Y was created in 1844 in London, England by a guy named George Williams.
Wow.
It's when the industrialized revolution, and essentially you had rural young men coming in to London to work, and there were all kinds of chaos and things going on, and George Williams started this organization.
Is that right? That's very interesting because, you think of the YMCA as being very American in a certain way. And you're saying it started in England, and it was a result of the Industrial Revolution where kids from the country basically found themselves in the city with work but no place to stay?
Bingo. And they were wreaking havoc in the system, and, they hadn't been in the city, and I'd say, drinking and fighting and all kinds of things. And hence the Young Men's Christian Association was created by George Williams initially to get young men with older men mentors around Bible study. That's essentially how the organization got founded. 1850,
which is another way of saying to get them off the street and stop drinking.
That's right. And fighting.
Yeah, and everything that comes with, and ruining their lives, basically.
Yeah, all the things that they shouldn't be doing, which I would argue is still happening today.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So if you follow the pathway, then Boston is the first United States YMCA in 1851, birthed there by a guy named Sir Thomas Sullivan, who saw the same thing in Boston, but it was sailors coming off port.
Wow.
And so it was the same thing. And then 1853 was the first Black Y by a guy named Anthony Bowen. Same thing happening in DC, but primarily for Black boys. And the reason that I say that and use that history is because essentially all I'm really doing is dusting off the railroad tracks and putting the train back on the tracks. The Y was focused on young men and boys historically. And we've gotten much bigger. We're in 120 countries. There's 10,000 communities in the U.S. But in a way, we've gotten so big, we've forgotten one particular audience. And one I would say is boys and young men of color. When you look at all of the both school data to a certain extent, crime data and others, right? There's just certain populations that rise to the top. And while that is not our total narrative, what I really want people to understand is you got to focus on not the carjacking, but the reason why they are carjacking. And generally, carjackings are young men, if you go back to 1844, who usually tell you that they do that because they had nothing to do.
Yeah.
Idle time. And so then the question is, how do you solve that problem?
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to go back into history to realize what you did that solved the problem and try to solve it again with new tools, innovation, and so forth. So that is essentially what I am. I'll give you the goal here up front, because I think your listeners would want to, like, what is the end goal? And so essentially we started just about 3 years ago. The first year was more like an environmental scan. And we ended up in the 11 to 17 category, nationally, after talking to a lot of people locally, statewide, nationally. We ended up at the most important years that we could focus on were middle school and high school. And then so our goal is to get to 100 cities, 10,000 boys by 2025.
Great. And what is the outcome that would produce, in terms of something like economic mobility, or, you're saying that would move the needle? Like it would, that's what I hear is when you have something that specific, you've looked ahead and you've seen, if we hit that would really be doing something.
Yeah, Doug, you're so good, man. You must be a really good consultant. So the end goal really is economic mobility. If you remember in 2018, particularly the folks who lived in Charlotte and a lot of other cities, there was a guy named Raj Chetty that did a Harvard report on economic mobility. He studied the Social Security numbers essentially over a 50-year period and sort of tracked people to figure out where they were and did we kind of win the war on poverty. That is essentially the primary research report we were indexing on in 2017. We launched the latter stages of 2018 into 2019. But generally what we're doing is boys, particularly Black boys, are 2 times more likely to be born in poverty, and then 4 times more likely to fall back down into poverty, even if they have been born into middle and upper income.
Really?
Yeah. So part of that was he had a sub report called The Punishing Impact on Black Boys and Men. And those data points came out, and our national office, along with, we have a group called the African American CEO Network that actually did some research and then launched the strategy, asked me to do it, and then launched the strategy in late 2018.
Well, if I could ask you to elaborate on the point you just made about the pull of poverty, it seems like, the way that even boys who have managed to pull themselves up to a level go back. Just that's hard for someone who that's not happened to imagine. And, what is going on that, but you see it happen in different populations worldwide, the sort of inability to sustain the breakthrough.
Yeah. That's a great question. I would say there are a variety of factors. There's a guy named Richard Reeves who just wrote a book called Of Boys and Men.
Okay.
Richard is formerly, he may still be a Brookings fellow, but he is Brookings Institute fellow. He's a white British man, by the way, which is interesting because he's from London.
Huh.
He said to him, our organization was founded where you're from, Richard. But he just wrote a book, Of Boys and Men, which I would
So this is, let's say it again for people, Richard Reeves, very British sounding name, Of Boys.
Of Boys and Men.
Of Boys and Men. Okay.
Yeah. So if he launched that book just a little over a year ago, and if you just Google or Safari or search engine, Richard Hughes, Of Boys and Men. It'll come up as a yellow cover. And it's basically part of what you're saying is why boys and what happens to boys. So particularly for Black and brown boys, I would say really this is for all boys, but particularly for Black and brown boys is we have to remember the generational poverty when you're working out of generational poverty. And let me be clear. My mother was a housekeeper. My father was an auto mechanic. Now I don't know that I knew or would have put my context to say I was poor. I came because I had a loving family.
Right.
As I say to people, I didn't realize what layaway was because I thought everybody did layaway. You know what layaway? So back in the era for the audience, if you're younger, you would go pick out clothes. In this instance, it would be clothes. You could pick out anything, merchandise. It would cost a certain amount of money, and then you would pay it over in installments. And once you paid it in installments, you could take it home. That was called layaway. And as I say to people, like, I remember going and buy clothes and thinking that was normal until I got out of my neighborhood. And then I realized, oh no, some people just walk home with those clothes. And why walk home with them? And then I realized, oh, we must not have as much money. My parents had to pay it down. I think what can happen is there's cyclical things in the industry, how we take on trauma. I would say just because we got out, sometimes I would say in some families' instance, I don't know that this is just Black families or Hispanic, Latino families, but generally, right, is you also need present parents. Parents that are, you could be making all the money in the world. And we see this all the time. But if you're not home connecting with your children as mom and dad or two parents, then what can happen, right, is they break the cycle.
Yes.
Because how you got there is not how they got there.
Yeah, got it. So it's interesting. It's money makes a difference, but that's not the only thing that makes a difference.
Well, the human experience is what makes the biggest difference. And I mean, I have two boys myself. So I would say what happens in the cycle is, particularly when you're born into poverty, you could be just on the edge of poverty. And let's just say you got out just on the edge, but sometimes the cycle and what you learn, particularly if you don't have adults around you in that experience, you have a tendency to go right back to what could be simpler on some level. And so, like I would say, we have exceptionally smart boys that we work with nationwide, but sometimes they're using their knowledge and experience in the underground economy. Right. They're not in the economy that you and I participate in. So part of what I say to people is, because I have a lot of wonderful friends who might call themselves moderate conservatives, and they ask me, why should I do it? I say, well, these two young men will do one of two things when they get older. They'll either make or take taxes. You want to make it or take it. Okay, then you got to get them in earlier. Today, what I would say to you that the country can rally around and why the systemic issues will continue to be compounded, and it'll be primarily in Black and brown neighborhoods, but not exclusively. If you look at the national data point, 66% of kids K to 12 are chronically absent from school. Now, we've learned that has gotten an uptick coming out of COVID, meaning you have kids that have 4 or more absences in one particular semester.
Yes.
Which means sometimes in most school districts, they just think you moved and they kind of take you off the attendance rolls. That is the thing that we have to attack, because chronic absenteeism equates to whether you get into what we would call the traditional economy or the underground. If you're not going to school, you learn how to get into the underground economy.
Yeah.
If you're going to school, you learn how to get into what I would say the more traditional economy, meaning there are trades. You can learn how to be a plumber and own your own plumbing business, or you can go to college and learn how to be an engineer. But those are taxable roles.
Yes, that's right.
I always tell young men, you want to do 2 things when you get older. First, you want to get into a role that takes you to a career. And then the second thing is you want to pay taxes, because when you pay taxes, you become a stakeholder and a shareholder in the interest called democracy.
Yeah.
And if you don't like where your taxes are going, you have the ability to vote for people who share your interests, which is why we have a democracy.
Well, but it's a long road. Even what you just said, that was like 5 steps. I followed you, but I'm not sure an 18-year-old is going to follow you because there's a shorter term incentive. So I really think it's important what you're saying here is you got to provide the incentive to participate. Because the incentive to participate in the underground economy is a much more short-term incentive, like, cash now. That's what the incentive is. And, there's a whole underground economy based on immigration and so forth that it's possible to participate in. Right. And then there's the overground economy, we could call it. It's not the underground one. And, you've got to make the case that it's worthwhile to participate in that. And the incentive, what you're saying is there is the long-term incentive to participate in the economy, which I had to see, even as a white boy, I had to see, well, am I going to do that? Or am I just going to, what would be the equivalent today? Just go and grow marijuana because that's going to be legal anyway. And I could just do that and not work for anybody. There's that line of reasoning, right? So I think that's what you're talking about in terms of a strategy is how to attract boys and young men of color to participate in the mainstream economy. Isn't that a lot of what you're saying?
Yeah. So I think that's good, Doug. And what I would say is what we are doing in its simplicity is trying to take down barriers.
Okay.
Make it simpler for the system leader, the adult practice leader in a system, and then which we might call youth directors or program managers, and then make it simpler for the young men to see that access and to give them more opportunities, which then allows, to me, as I say, is it allows them to exceed their own expectations. So we have 4 metrics that we look at, which are standardized across the system, which is why we're not a program. We're more of a strategy because boys will need more than one program. Right? What people have to understand in its simplicity, programs are interventions to solve problems.
Yes.
Right? And it's people who are the systems change. So the boys aren't broken, the systems are broken. And so part of what we're doing is repairing the breach in the system. So 4 metrics. 1, we first work on the adult practitioner and the system, and we talk more around cultural responsiveness and cultural competency. And we do that by self-assessments. We never know what their own assessment is, but we aggregate that in the system. So we see broadly when we have 300-400 leaders that we're working with, we can see where are they along a continuum from denial to adaptability. And we index on training to get the leader to see the system. Because if boys, and I would really say any youth in particular, when they see an environment of belonging and they feel an environment of belonging, then they not only participate, but they engage, right? And it's active engagement that we want. 2 is we take the social emotional assessment of boys. So boys go on. There are 5 things that we look for. It's a tool called Hello Insights. Once again, we aggregate that data. So we have 4,100 boys across 52 cities currently. And what we can do is aggregate the data. So one quick application of the practical application of what you would do is, 1, we hear the voices of the boys. One of the 5 traits that we look at is academic self-efficacy, which to the audience could be practically just confidence. So generally,
what did you call it again? What's the term?
Academic self-efficacy.
Academic self-efficacy. So what does it mean? To know what you know or something like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, so it's like how do you feel about your academics?
I see.
In a way, like how confident are you about your academics? And what we see is currently in that data, 78% of our boys, particularly in high school, are highly confident. But then when you look at their grades, they're between a 1.4 and a 1.6.
Wow.
So as we say, if you're in ninth grade, and let's just say you have a goal to go to trade school, and let's just say that trade is you want to be an electrician. Well, that trade school may be the long-term goal or the short-term goal or the midterm goal to get you there is it to get entry. There are requirements. One of them could be that you need to have a 2.0 or better. So what we do is make sure we show the young man early enough, hey, a 1.4 is, you still have time to correct it. But by junior year, you need to be at a 2.0 or better. Yes. And if you get to a 2.0 or better, we can activate a way for you to become that plumber and possibly actually own your own plumbing business. Yeah. The third metric is we want to reduce suspensions, increase attendance, and increase grades. And then the fourth attendance is we have a mobile app actually that was founded in Charlotte called Gratify with a D. It's a mobile app that boys get on. They answer a series of questions. You can answer them as early as sixth grade. We recommend seventh grade. But what it does is it gives them the top 3 careers that they're interested in. Because part of what we have to pull back as a country is, why does school matter for me? And what is it that I think I want to be once this K through 12 experience is over? Probably in about middle school, you have ideas of what you want to do. So it's whether the young man actually enters in to become a plumber or not doesn't matter to us. It more matters that he has a goal past high school. Because 80% of the kids that have a goal past high school not only graduate from high school, but they get into the goal, the aspiration.
So Gratify, is that what you said? Gratify, the app, like Gradify?
Yep, Gratify.
That's the...
Yeah, it's founded actually in Charlotte.
And what would people find there? What
you find is if you go online, it tells you, but it's basically a mobile app that shows the young man the career pathway that he can take starting in 7th grade. Then he gets to 8th grade, then he gets to 9th grade, then he gets to 10th grade. And it shows you a pathway. We're building out like a checklist.
Right. Because they don't have anybody talking to them about that. And this is something they're looking at anywhere on their phone, right? So it'll be something they can start to even think that way, that there is a pathway. Yeah. That's great. That's great. I mean, when I was in 7th grade, I guess they talked to me about that, but not in a way I would like to be talked about it. I mean, it's really it's important to talk to them in their language. Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah. And with obviously, it's another way to use a mobile device, which is their own tool.
Yeah, they're already using it. Yep.
It has a way to do two-way communication, and you can drop down videos inside of it. So what it does is it allows the young man to pull back the curtain and see that education is not just something your parents are asking you to do and your teachers are forcing you to do. It leads you somewhere.
Yes.
And part of the systemic issues, I think, we are sometimes relying on traditional methods that don't speak to our current young people. So if I were, my oldest son is a nuclear medicine technician in a hospital. If you had asked me what that was, I would not be able to tell you.
Yeah.
I know what it is now.
Yeah. Yeah. So that makes one of us. Okay.
Yeah. So when he told me he wanted to do it at first, I said, you're going to work at a nuclear plant? Well, no, it's in a hospital. Okay. And what he does is the radiologist technician puts the gamma fluid inside you and looks primarily at your organs. So, he got there because he was interested in something in high school, and then he pursued it. My youngest son is a public sector consultant working for Grant Thornton. And he knew that he wanted to do that at 16. He came in and told me he wanted to solve the world economic global poverty, and he wanted to be in public sector work. And we were like, what are you talking about? And he ended up pursuing what he wanted to do. And that's what we want to have people do, right? Is if you don't have, in my instance, I didn't have parents who went to college. As I said, both my parents were in trades. So I had to have people around me who could introduce me to college. And my parents knew enough to encourage that. But in terms of having had the experience, they couldn't give it to me. In our household, we may have had it, but neither of my wives are in that kind of profession.
Right.
We had to kind of get them with people, like we don't really know much about that, but we know some people who work in hospitals, we know some people who work in consulting firms. Let's get you with some of the people that we know. So one of the things we try to tell people in its simplicity is that your young kids at a very early age, and they get this in 7th grade, your network is your net worth. It's not the money you have, it's the people you know.
Yeah.
And using your network for good, because you could be with bad people too. That's what takes you to bad things.
Yeah.
So we say, no, establish a positive network and you can do almost anything that you want.
That's a fantastic message. And talk about systemic needs. I want to let our listeners in on something they can't see, which is what it says on your hat, which is belonging. And you call yourself, in one of the write-ups I saw, a belonging curator. So I like to give you a chance to expound on that.
Yeah. So I, to edit on that word a lot, right? People know what belonging means. You can't see the hat, the group can't see the hat, but the hat is also purple. And in the current context, red and blue make purple.
Very good.
Right? It's not whether you are politically in the red areas or politically in the blue areas. It's the common ground in the middle that drives the economy, the country, and the people, the system. So part of what I use that belonging curator and belonging strategist is because essentially what I'm communicating to everybody is it all comes back to belonging, a shared experience, a lived experience that you're sharing. And as you share that experience with others edit off your experience, not necessarily do exactly what you're doing, but they may do something that a sliver of it, they like that, and they may take a piece of it, and then they may decide, right? And so part of it is, how do we talk to our young men? We talk to them with a state of belonging, not othering, not they. We utilize the term just, I'm here to help you develop what it is you think you want to do. So I'm here to nurture your potential. And it's all a lot in the wording and producing that environment. Because most of the reasons that kids edit out of school is because the school doesn't feel like the environment that they belong to.
Yeah. Very clear. Very clear. And so one of the things that I noticed on your resume that stood out to me is this Champions of Change Award that you got from the White House. Could you tell me a little bit about that? It's a little bit of a diversion from what we have been talking about, but I didn't want to let you get out of the podcast without having to talk about it a little bit.
No, thank you.
That was a global work, right? That wasn't in the United States. So that's what I mean. I'm changing the subject a little bit, but tell us about that.
Yeah. So I, for the listeners, Former President Obama had Champions of Change, very similar to George Bush's 1,000 Points of Light.
Yes.
And I was recognized because of the global work that I was doing for the YMCA over time. So in my early days, I was a very big, active supporter of the country of Bangladesh. So my Y, the Ys are partnered sometimes with U.S. Ys with Ys across the country or across the world and other countries. And so I was partnered with Bangladesh and did a series of things while I was in Evanston, Illinois, working at that Y with the YMCAs of Bangladesh. Learned a lot about Asia. In fact, as a young man at 31, I spent my first I went around the globe, literally. My first trip ever out of the country. I went from Asia to the Asia Ys, a series of Asia Ys, to London, and then came home. And so literally I circled the globe. So I've been to about 14, 15 countries over time. And More recently, particularly when I worked at the YMCA's of Charlotte, I was very involved in two Ys, the YMCA's in Senegal, West Africa, and the Gambia.
Mm.
And that the Charlotte Y partners with those particular Ys. So we did the same thing and led a contingent of folks. And the Y had a classification of global excellence leader as a system. And because I had been in two different systems, elevating the global work, they nominated me and I was accepted to become one of President Obama's champions of change.
Well, congratulations on that. It really says a lot about the commitment that you have in your whole life to making a difference with people wherever you're engaged, and in particular this current strategy and this current thrust of the YMCA, so timely, and so important. So anything else you can tell us about what people can do to participate or find out more if people are stimulated by hearing about this? What would be an action you would want people to take or urge people to take?
Yeah, so one action would be you can find us on ymca.net/BYMOC. That website will take you to the National Wise website. And what you can see is what the strategy looks like, the things we measure, what we're in service to. It will also give you an indication of the 53 cities that we were in. And then in 2024, we plan to be in 72 cities. So we'll add 19 or so.
And then 100 by 25.
And then 100
right?
by 2025. Okay. That's right.
All right. Very good. So just in case you didn't think I was listening. Yeah. Okay. And then so that would be, let's give that again a little bit slower.
So,
okay.
YMCA.net/BYMOC, Boys and Young Men of Color.
Perfect.
And I would say then contact your local Y. And if you don't have one in your system, get involved and tell them to have one, because it's not, Ys have to apply for it. We're not necessarily asking Ys, because we have 790 corporate Ys coast to coast. So we're only asking 100 of them to do it. Yeah. So you can also ask your Y to do it. And we're in rural America, we're in big city America, we're in mid-sized cities. We don't care about the city. We don't care about the Democratic or Republican color. It's a purple strategy. And then there's other ways to get involved by advocating in your own local town to look at what's happening with boys, I would say locally. And then particularly when you're looking at policies. So people say policies, so if you think about little things, $1.9 trillion in the American Rescue Plan Act, right, was allocated. I'm going to give people a practical example. 313 billion with a B of that 1.9 million or trillion was given to the Department of Education. So imagine if you think about the challenges and the opportunities that you're having in your own local city, and if you ask the government to allocate 5% of that $313 billion, what would happen if we allocated the resources to really focus on boys of color? I think you would have a different outcome 3 or 4 years later. And remember, we're more about the impact and the outcomes than we are the outputs and the inputs and the activities. Yeah. The activities are really important. So when I say to people, like, boys need basketball, but basketball is a translatable experience. It takes teamwork. That helps if you want a tech job. Sometimes you have to realize you're not the one that's hot. Somebody else is hot. You have to go with the leader. That applies to business. The leader is not always the leader, right? It's the person with the best idea at that moment in time and how that idea keeps building as a collective team. And sometimes it's you got to come step down to number 2 so that number 1 can take the idea to the next level. Number 3 might come and become number 1 again. And you have to go back down a spot, but you're still on the team and the team is still winning.
And sometimes you have to pass it to Draymond.
That's right. Yeah. Or ask him to give you that step out and give you that hard block that allows you to come around, right? Because he's not there. He may not be scoring or to agitate. I'm from Chicago originally, so Draymond sometimes reminds me of Dennis Rodman, right?
Oh, yeah.
It gets in your
Easy.
ear and gets you frustrated. Yeah,
That's right.
Everybody's got a place on the team, right? So
That's right.
I would say to people, though, really honestly, like I would compel you to really think about what's happening in your local city. And because I get asked this a lot, what about girls? And I say, okay, but if you go to your city data, school data, and you think about who is the most impacted negatively, it's generally your boys of color. And so in most instances, if you focus on that, the girls automatically get better because that's the term, the rising tide lifts all boats. And if in the business sense, if you had 8 business lines and you wanted them all to be strong and one of them wasn't producing the way that you want, you would take your best people and you would focus on that particular business line that would make the other 7 stronger because it now is stronger than it was, which allows everybody else to spend more time efficiently.
Well, and you also established, I think, in a compelling way that this is not your idea or a new idea or even an American idea. This is something that's been established. The original reason for the YMCA is that young men were, having difficulty in certain areas and with dealing with life and getting launched in an appropriate direction, and what to do with their idle time has been a problem for hundreds of years. And so it's not something that is just a product of urban America or something like that people might think. So I love that you're giving us a larger context for it. And I do think that there would be a lot of validation for your focus where you are focused, because you can't focus on everything, but you can, otherwise it's not focused.
well, Doug, you know this as a consultant, but what I tell people is you need targeted strategies. So while we're a strategy, not a program, it's because you need targeted strategies. That young man needs more than one program. And so if he's doing basketball and he's doing leadership development and he's doing something that, let's just say he decided to do a trade and you brought a trade in, what he starts to understand is he needs 3 or 4 things. And it's the 3 or 4 things he puts the puzzle pieces together that he forms his identity and what he wants to do later in life. And it's through that formation, which is why they tell you to take a collection of classes. You take a collection of classes because whether you might be good at English, but you could be good at math. But what professions put English and math together? If you are very good at math, but you're not great at English, but you like fixing things and putting things together, that could be plumbing.
Because you have to be able to explain it.
You have to be able to explain it, and you have to understand that there are elbows and there are dimensions, and so you help the young man see, oh, I never thought about I could do that. Well, you can. Did you know you could be an airline pilot, but you can also work in avionics? And there are tons of jobs in avionics. Did you know you have a local airport and that you could work at the local airport being an air traffic controller? Or, so you look at some of these jobs where we're struggling to find people. And if you go upstream and you introduce it earlier, because we're 11 to 17. And by the way, when we got founded, that was actually our primary target audience, was that middle and high school level. And most nonprofits were formed historically to improve academic outcomes. If you think about it, in 1867, I think it was called the Peabody Foundation, but it was formed to help poor, white, rural, Southern people and formerly enslaved Black people in the South. And what we forget is why the nonprofit sector was created. And then what we forget is sometimes what we feel is you have to utilize history to create a usable past. And so what we say to people is, if you go back and you see what the Y was doing in the first 100 years, there are things we can take out that we can learn, which I think we could say in our own government, right? There's cycles. Every president probably looks at the cycles and decides what to do as a result of previous decisions. And they may not take all of those decisions, but they may get one contextual point that they say, oh, wow, that's something I hadn't thought about that I can build on. And so what we want people to understand is back then in those days, I'll give you one fact. There were 84 Black Ys at its peak. in 1968. And then as integration and assimilation occurred, right, those Ys went down. But if you go back and look at the historic trend of how those Ys got built, there's a white philanthropist named Julius Rosenwald that some people know of the Rosenwald schools.
Okay.
The single buildings that were called Rosenwald schools, primarily in Black communities. Well, he also built, as a Jewish philanthropist and a Christian, at the time, a very Christian-based organization, Julius Rosenwald helped build, he didn't build, he invested $25,000 of the $100,000 to build 24 of those 84 Black Ys.
Wow.
And this is what he said. Now Julius Rosenwald owned Sears and Roebuck.
Okay.
And so he was the one that developed the catalog company for the young people. Google it, search engine it, because you may not know what that is.
I know exactly what that is.
Yeah,
the Christmas catalog. We had it when we were young.
Yeah, everybody had it, right? So he owned that company and he wanted to give back. And one of the things he says, we have a national archives at the University of Minnesota. So I can go into and find almost anything that was written and recorded and sent to the archives. So I'll give you two interesting facts. One is, one of the things he said is, I did not want to give the Negroes a building, but the Negroes wanted a building, so I gave them a building. But what I was interested in was Negro leadership. I was fearful that the country was not investing in Negro leadership. That's why Julius Rosenwald gave that $25,000 to each of those 24 Ys. Wow. He got convinced to do that by Booker T. Washington. He became friends with Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington and W.E. Du Bois, who we know as very sizable icons, particularly, I would say, in all of history, but particularly in Black history. Booker T. Washington and W.E. Du Bois were co-creating how to work with the Y on a career and college readiness strategy. And if you know a little bit about history, what you know is Du Bois was more interested in college, and Booker T. Washington was more interested in trades. And what they did is, on those historical Black colleges campuses, there were 22 student activity centers called Student Ys. And that's where they were building out the leadership for the 84 Black Ys. And what you see in the early days is a woman named Madam C.J. Walker, who became a millionaire through Black hair products. And she was an investor in 6 or 7 of those Ys. And then, there was a guy, I'll just tell you one last little history fact. In 1888, there was a guy named William Hunton out of Norfolk, Virginia. Or if you're from Norfolk, you said Norfolk. But after the Civil War, William Hunton was more, if Bowen was the founder in 1853, William Hunton really proved to be the catalyst after the war. And one of the things we have found out is that William Hunton's father was friends with John Brown, the white abolitionists.
Yeah, Harper's Ferry.
And part of what he built his construct on, how to help build those 84 Black Ys, is with a strategy that his parents and John Brown helped him with.
Wow.
And so what we say is, the way we get back out of polarization as a country is to build together.
Fantastic.
Build with belonging.
That's right. Well, fantastic. What a great message. And so, Michael DeVaul with the YMCA, thank you for being on the Empowering Leadership podcast. And good luck to you and those that you're mentoring. I know that many of these boys and young men will, in fact, be the leaders of tomorrow, the ones that Mr. Rosenwald was looking for.
That's right.
Okay.
Thank you, Doug. We'll continue to work together to empower leaders.
Thank you for listening to Empowering Leadership. If you enjoyed this episode, take a moment to subscribe for free on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a rating and a review so that other leaders like yourself can find us. Sign up for Dorrier Underwood's email newsletter by visiting us at dorrierunderwood.com. That's it for now. Go forth and be amazing, and take good care of your people. Empowering Leadership is produced by Dorier Underwood and Andy Go of Gojo Studios. Dorier Underwood serves visionary companies who are serious about realizing their dreams and who are unwilling to settle for incremental results. Our clients are looking for breakthrough results and a deeper sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. To learn more, visit us at dorierunderwood.com.